Welcome to Behind the Page with Ann Bernath. On July 14th, 2024, I participated in an author event at Flintridge Bookstore in La Canada-Flintridge, California, along with authors Chick Lewis and Jemela Macer. The little bookstore was packed. Everyone seemed to have a great time. So here's the video of the author presentations and Q&A that occurred afterwards. Enjoy.
Glowing on you?
I know more about this than we do.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's up to you.
I'll take your
you're
call.
probably going to have some stragglers, but you have a full house anyway.
Okay.
And it's hot, so
So, yeah,
maybe we just get
started.
everybody ready to
Get
get
mighty.
started? Okay. I'm Gail from Flintridge Bookstore, and I just wanted to say hi and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming out. Today we are really pleased to feature three local authors, Ann Bernath, Chick Lewis, and Jemela Macer. And they are three authors working in mostly different genres. We have two travel memoirs, but they're also of different types of travel memoirs. And so every once in a while we do these multiple author events so that we can present different styles and perspectives sort of all together at one time. And we found it to be pretty interesting because people come to hear the person they know and then learn about something else. So I just wanted to give a brief introduction of the books and the authors, and then I'll turn it over to them. But Ann's book, Rock, Stone, Pebble, is a historical adventure romance novel. Chick and Jemela's books are memoirs, both dealing with traveling the world. Chick's just another pilgrim on the train to Wow. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Perfect.
Okay.
Couldn't be better.
Is about global wandering to soak up as much foreign culture as possible. Jemela also explores the globe in her book Between Two Worlds, an Armenian-American woman's journey home, but she also travels to better understand her Armenian roots. So just a little bit about each author. Bernath has pretty much been writing her entire life. In 2023, two of her short stories were included in the anthology Inner Space and Outer Thoughts, speculative fiction from Caltech and JPL authors. She currently has a prequel to Rock, Stone, Pebble in progress, as well as a fantasy novel. Lewis worked at 3D Systems as an engineer, where he designed and built the prototypes for the world's first commercial 3D printers. He is a co-inventor on at least 18 U.S. patents. Chick retired in 2009 and resumed his traveling extensively at that point. Macer is a clinical psychologist in private practice in Pasadena. She taught English as a second language and cross-cultural communication at the University of Southern California and cross-cultural psychology at Antioch University. She has also consulted in the areas of diversity and parenting. So what's going to happen is each author is going to discuss their book. Maybe they'll read a little bit from it, and then we'll have a shared Q&A at the end of their presentation. So if everybody could just leave their questions until the end, that would be great. And everybody's books are available for sale up at the front counter. We also have copies of Inner Space and Outer Thoughts and two of Chick's other travel memoirs available for sale too. So if you want a copy, you can get it, at the end, and they will be happy to sign it for you. So thank you again for coming. I'm going to turn it over to the authors, and I'm going to start with Ann.
Are there more seats available?
We have no more chairs, but standing room, it is standing room. So
someone can take this one.
And I'll use my
Cleverly planned ahead.
Cleverly planned ahead.
Yeah. I know this happens. That's so nice of you. There's a little stool here. Somebody want to sit on the stool? I can bring it up front.
Sounds good in case somebody else shows up.
Okay. All right.
Here we go.
There's a chair right here.
Oh, okay. And let me just put this here in case somebody wants to sit here. We have a very intimate space here, so we can only have so many. All right. Sorry. Go ahead, Ann.
Okay. I'm Ann Bernath, as previously mentioned. My book is Rock, Stone, Pebble, and it's primarily a Western adventure with a splash of romance, set in a world that will at first feel familiar, even though she said it was historical. You'll first feel familiar, yet you'll soon realize it isn't our Old West at all. The story follows a young woman who lives in a big city in what's called the provinces, as she sets out to visit her aunt and uncle, which requires a short coach ride across the wildlands. When her coach is waylaid, her coach mate abducted, and the coach driver runs off and abandons her on the road alone. Luckily, she's rescued by two legendary dusters, individuals who are similar to Texas Rangers in many ways. But instead of escorting her home, they take her with them to hunt down the riders who waylaid the coach, since she can recognize the man they abducted, as well as one of the riders whose face she happened to see. And so begins her adventure. So this book began when this opening scene, pretty much as I described, appeared in my mind, and I wrote a half page of the opening without knowing any of the details. Who was she? Where was she going? Who was her coach mate? Who were the riders? And what did they want with this man? I didn't even have the term dusters. I just left a little placeholder with brackets. These people, oops, it needs a name. I saved the file and put it away until who knows how much later, a couple years probably, until I had the urge to answer those questions and find out what this story was about. So I have 3 snippets from the book I'd like to read to give you a sense of the characters in the story. And they're short, and we're going to start with the opening to chapter 2. And once again, I forgot to bring my reading glasses, so there's that. Okay. The Coach Road, a conduit between Diamond Point and Widow's Peak provinces, can be traversed by coach in less than 3 days, just skirting the northern boundary of the wide open spaces between them, known as the Wildlands. I should have been on that road, safe inside a coach, dozing or planning my upcoming stay at my aunt and uncle's ranch, but the dusters, with me in tow, had deviated from the road hours before, traveling south and east across the plains, exposed now to its denizens of wild animals, adventure seekers, and ruffians, each passing moment taking me deeper into unfamiliar territory. I rode with Rock, the blue-eyed duster, his massive arms holding me securely in the saddle in front of him. His body was warm, the sun was warm, I was exhausted. My body yearned for sleep, but each time my eyes began to close, the bouncing gait of Rock's horse jolted them open again, reminding me I shouldn't be here riding horseback with a stranger across the wildlands. The wildlands. Even though I had gazed out the coach's windows several times, only now did I grasp the full expanse of the landscape. Nothing obscured the view, no structures, no trees, only scrub brush and tumbleweeds dotted the ground. Hills sat on the horizon looking small and ghostly in the distant haze. The sky was a deep blue, accented by a scattering of thin cloud wisps that seemed in danger of disappearing at any moment. The air smelled different than it did on the streets of Grandview or the open areas of the university, carrying aromas of earth and sage and horse and sweat, instead of the man-made aromas of perfumes and the smoke from coal fires. The breeze that teased at my hair, at times gusting and roaring in my ears, both felt and sounded as if it were a living thing. I could almost feel my brain wrestling to comprehend this new reality. That's that. Early in the book, and then I have a couple teases from later in the book. I didn't know what Bennett might have imagined he would see when he finally opened the box. But after days of staring up at it in anticipation, he must have considered many possibilities. Gemstones, perhaps mounted as jewels in bracelets or crowns or even weapons, or gold or silver ore, or coins or small figurines, or less likely paper currency if it hadn't rotted away to dust. Red and Rafe had no doubt imagined a find of a lifetime to be riches beyond compare, and they had no doubt made plans for the windfall it would give them. I hadn't given it much thought at all, much more concerned with finding Bennett than the treasure he sought. But I had to admit I had been looking forward to the discovery. After all, on his deathbed, Bernard Anders had sent his brother on this quest as his final gift to him. It had to be something, as Bennett had said, special. And then a little later, the gift wasn't heavy, and I could feel the shape of a small box underneath the neckerchief that served as its wrapping. Up until now, I had avoided contemplating its contents, but I couldn't help but speculate to some degree. The box might contain something I had admired at the marketplace, jewelry perhaps, although I wondered if Rock would really give me something so significant as a parting gift. It was very possible that the gift could just be the box itself, for I had seen some lovely hand-carved boxes at the marketplace, some lined with velvet. Had I gazed at those boxes admiringly? I couldn't remember. But Rock said it was something that would remind me of our time together, so the box must contain something, maybe from both Rock and Stone, or something personal of theirs, although I couldn't imagine what. Dusters seemed to only carry necessities for the job and their survival, but I didn't need to continue to wonder. All I needed to do to find out was open it. I ran my fingers over the knot formed by the tied corners of the neckerchief and set the gift on my nightstand where I could see it when I went to sleep and when I woke up each morning. The unopened gift kept my time in the wildlands, my time with Rock and Stone, in suspension. Opening it would start the clock again. There would come a time, I felt certain, when I would open it, but it wouldn't be tonight. One of those snippets. So the prequel is underway, and my nephew says that I should point out that it's sci-fi. So that's me.
Shall I take over?
In
Hard act to follow. I'm Chick Lewis, and I'm the second presenter of the evening. Everybody, I think, has seen my little handout with my path that I used to travel around the world once really slow and really cheaply, back 1974 through 78. And since then, I've been had a really lucky, fun career. Got to invent stuff. Got to take new technologies from the back of an envelope to market. So I'm probably one of the luckiest guys you've ever met as well. The 3 books I've got here. The first one, just another pilgrim on the train to Wow. It covers the journey through Africa, just another pilgrim on the truck to Leh, all of Europe and most of Asia. Just another pilgrim on the boat to Wewak covers everything after that. Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the Far East. And I ran into a lot of pretty interesting circumstances because I was traveling super low budget, always the cheapest lodging, always the cheapest transportation. And in 41 months, I managed to spend $9,000, just under. So that's under $7 a day, including the tickets over the big ocean. So that was a bargain, for sure, a bargain. And I thought that I might read a little bit. The book's sort of organized by stories. You can probably imagine that conflict makes the best stories, right? So all of the stories are going to have some kind of conflict in them to make it worth talking about. And if you just read this cold, my manuscripts, it seems like it was a tremendous hassle. Every day was challenging. Nothing could be farther from the truth. For every one of these stories that was good enough to include, there were 10 where everything was just wonderful. The people were perfect. Everybody was happy to see me. So keep that in your mind. All right? So how did I decide that I needed to do this? I have vivid memories of going up to my father, Walt, when I was 9 years old. And I said, Walt, I think that I should go traveling because it's not the same sitting here in California reading about the pyramids as it is sitting on top of one of the pyramids reading about the pyramids. And my father, Walt, was a smart guy, and he knew that he wasn't that thrilled with this idea because, of course, it'll put me at risk lots of times, right? But he, instead of meeting it head on, which he knew would fail, he said, "That's a great idea, Chick, but here's how you do it. First, you stay in school and you get good grades so you can get into the university. Then get some kind of a degree that you can use to earn money. Then make the money using your degree, and then go traveling." He, of course, thinking that by that time I'd have a wife and children and a mortgage, and it would never happen. But I followed his plan just right to the letter, and it worked out really well for me. Here's a chunk of prose that I put together. One of the first places I went was Africa because it was really interesting to me. And maybe I'll even stand up for that so I can project a little better.
The year was?
Huh?
The year?
75? Thanks, Donna. Early in my super low budget vagabonding, I found myself in North Africa, in Tunisia, planning to hitchhike across Libya to Egypt and south up the Nile to sub-Saharan Africa. In a seedy port town named Sfax, I fell in with a nice young Tunisian named Abdul Jabbar, who was interested in all things American. So we palled around together while I waited for my visa for Libya to be issued. The U.S. guided missile cruiser Little Rock happened to be in port and had released a few hundred sailors for Cinderella Liberty. Cinderella Liberty is the one where you have to be back on board by midnight or you're in heaps of trouble. I met a group of these sailors on the street in the morning and helped them with English-French translations. They wanted to know how to say, "Where's the discotheque?" And they were thrilled to know that the long word is exactly the same in both languages. So they wandered off telling one another, "Où est la discotheque?" And that was great. And that night, Abdul Jabbar and I were traversing the dock area just before midnight, headed back towards my cheap lodging and his mother's apartment. And the damp, grotty lanes almost completely deserted, but we bumped into a group of 6 American sailors headed back from their liberty. Of the 6, 4 of them were some of the same guys that I had befriended with translation earlier in the day, right? The other 2 being older, saltier swabbies. They were all drunk and had not yet had their fight for the evening. This is a bad situation. It's bad. The 2 older sailors came up to me on the echoing dark street and couldn't help but notice my straight, shoulder-length hair and jewelry. They decided to deride me for being, in their eyes, a homosexual. Terrible thing. Making lots of rude, mincing comments about how beautiful they found me, including the details of the sexual acts they intended to enjoy with such a pretty little bit of fluff. They intruded into my personal space, even grabbing my t-shirt up and twisting it to make phony nipples on it. So things are not going the right direction at all. I spoke to them openly and reasonably, tried to make conversation. Every time I took a calm step back, they were immediately up in my face again. The 2 drunks really wanted me to take a swing at one of them so they could finish their liberty by beating up a homosexual before returning to the ship. Things were very tense. I turned my head to Abdul Jabbar, motioned with my chin, told him, "Cour," which is French for run. Abdul Jabbar couldn't speak English, but was well aware that something really heavy was taking place in that language. He vanished from just behind my elbow. I was relieved that he had bugged out. No use 2 of us getting thrashed. Being beaten up by multiple opponents was familiar to me. I had experience. And I knew, while very unpleasant, the experience is survivable. I spent a few seconds getting myself used to the idea that I would be beat horribly bloody and resigned myself to the fact. My acceptance of the future brought an emotional liberation. I knew from past experience that I would only get to throw a single punch before I was swarmed, and that I would only get that one punch if I swung first. The only satisfaction I'd get from the evening would be landing that one solid blow. Everything after would be only pain and blood. The time had come where I had to do something other than take another step back. The bleary, jeering eyes of my countrymen were only inches away from my own, and the liquor fumes of their breath choked me. Turning slightly right, I moved my right hand back, closed my fist, but I bumped something at my elbow. Rats! There, directly behind me, was Abdul-Jabbar. He hadn't left, he'd only moved out of my peripheral vision. Things are going from bad to worse. To his eternal credit, he stood by me in spite of the imminent threat of being beaten up by 6 foreigners. 2-6 is hopeless odds in a street fight. I hadn't accepted the idea that my young friend Abdul-Jabbar would be injured. So my one good punch plan was ruined. It was dead. It was gone. I had a long shot idea and asked the most aggressive opponent, "What do you do on the Little Rock?" His piggy eyes regarded me suspiciously. Confused by the change of subject, admitted that he was chief bosun something or other. "That sounds like an important position," I offered. Well, it was just as though I'd reached inside his little head and flipped a switch. He stopped, puffed up slightly, and started to explain to me just how important he was. Shortly, he offered me a pull from his hip flask of liquor and slapped me on the back, allowing as how I didn't seem to be such a bad guy. A few minutes later, we parted regretfully, vowing eternal friendship because they had to get back aboard by midnight. So against all odds, we did not get pounded into the pavement that night, and I learned an important lesson. Every aggressive asshole in the world is proud of something. If you can figure out what that something is and express an interest in it, you cease to be a person who should be knocked down and become someone to whom to brag. And once you make that crucial transition from opponent to audience, belligerence just fades away. I've used this defensive technique twice since, and it has never yet failed me. I have a couple other things I was going to say before I turn it over to you, and I'll try and be brief. I broke my travelogue into 3 books. The story that I just read for you is probably not one of the top 5, even in the first book, in my opinion. So I can almost guarantee you'll find things there to hold your interest if you choose to purchase. In addition, Gail and I came to an understanding, and you can buy these here today, $3 cheaper than you can buy them online. So bargain as well, if there are any of you bargain hunters out there. Now I need to check my notes. Please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jemela Macer, and this is my memoir. I think it's billed as a travel memoir. It's not exactly a travel memoir, although there's a whole lot of travel in it. It's sort of more like an inner and outer journey toward healing. Bear with me, I'm a psychologist. I talk a lot about healing. So I'd like to start by reading the epigraph in my book, which is a quote by the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. If you look deeply into the palm of your hand, you will see your parents and all generations of your ancestors. All of them are alive at this moment. Each is present in your body. You are the continuation of each of these people. So I always wanted to write from an early age, but I never really did it except academic stuff for my career as a clinical psychologist. And actually, I'm actually a psychologist here in La Cañada now, no longer in Pasadena. But two things happened that in my 60s that kind of told me, okay, it's time for you to start writing. The first was that one Friday night, some friends and I were having dinner at Mahari's, which is a Mexican restaurant in Pasadena that some of you may know. We decided we'd go out for some margaritas. Well, I didn't want to go because I'm not in good shape on Friday night, and I just want to go home. So I was in a really crabby mood, as my husband will remember. This is my husband here. And I didn't want to go. So I was like, and I ended up sitting next to this new colleague of mine who I didn't know very well, and her name was Raven. She had a long dark hair and big black eyes. She kind of looked like a raven. And she, in addition to being a psychologist, she practiced Tibetan shamanism. So needless to say, I was really intimidated by her. And she had the office across the hall, and I would like avoid her every time I saw her. So she's sitting next to me, and we're having a margarita, and I'm not happy to be there. And she leans over to me, and she says, Jemela. And she says, Jemela, because she has a Hong Kong accent. She says, Jemela, there's an old woman whispering in my ear in a language I don't understand. She says you should write a book. Are you writing a book? Who is she? Do you know who she is? I looked and said, no, I'm not writing a book, and I don't know who she is. But I did know who she was. I think that I knew who she was. Okay. So she was my paternal grandmother, whose name is Jemela, and some of my relatives are here today, died the year before I was born of ovarian cancer. And so I never knew her, but I was named after her. So I had a hunch, this is my Armenian grandmother talking in Armenian to my Tibetan shaman friend, telling me I should write a book. I said, shit, what is this? Anyway. But it made me remember an incident that had happened a few years earlier when my husband Jim and I had been visiting the North Rim of the Grand Canyon. I'll read a bit here. That August morning, we drove around the park and stopped at a vast shimmering green meadow stretching along the main road to the lodge. The smell of morning dew permeated the air. We walked toward a clump of low trees and monolithic gray rocks burrowed into the hill. I scrambled atop the giant, flattest boulder I could find. It was a warm, robin's egg blue day. The air was still, and no one was around. My husband, Jim, a physician turned energy healer, asked if I wanted to take a shamanic healing journey. I said sure, and laid my head against the cold stone, stretching my legs as far as they could go. Begin to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, he began, and I breathed in and out slowly until my limbs became jelly against the cold stone. See a large tree in front of you, he continued, leading me on an inner journey up through the tree's branches into the endless blue sky. Soon the tree turned into a wooden ladder, stretching upward into what seemed like infinity. I began to climb the ladder. I passed the mythical land of the stone people described to us by indigenous healers of the Andes, and then the land of the plant people. Soon I peered into the land of the animals, watching deer and gazelle skitter across the green grass and monkeys fly from trees. I kept climbing and arrived in the fourth world where humans go after death, according to the Quechua healers of the high Andes, with whom Jim had been working and studying for several years. Look around, see who awaits you. Jim's voice sounded far away. Who do you see? I was in a deep trance and looked around to see who might greet me. There before me I noticed my paternal grandmother. I recognized her from our old frayed black and white photographs. Prominent nose, pockmarked face, stocky body in a floral shirtwaist dress, sensible black leather shoes, and piercing eyes. She stared directly at me. Her intense gaze frightened me. Heal me, she said. Heal me, she repeated. Live the life I could not live. I was taken aback. I had never before had an encounter with my paternal grandmother, nor had ever dreamed of her, or frankly, I'd never even thought of her. What did that mean, heal this dead grandmother I had never met? Many indigenous and spiritual healers believe that if we heal ourselves, we heal not only ourselves, but the generations past and the generations yet to come. Was I supposed to somehow heal myself and also this dead grandmother? A few years later, I signed up to take a memoir class on writing, never really intending to actually write a book, but at least to finally begin to write something. During the first weekend of the class, one of the teachers asked us to write down on a 3x5 card, well, what are you here to write about? I wrote one sentence. What does healing look like? As I said, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I had been working with Armenian patients in my office in Glendale for many years. I was aware of the huge rage and hurt many carried about the genocide, which had happened more than 100 years before in Turkey, when 1.5 million Armenians were murdered by the Turkish government, and many more driven into the Syrian desert on starvation marches. I wondered, how do we heal this vast, gaping cultural wound? I personally am also the grandchild of 4 Armenian genocide survivors, hailing from 2 small towns in central Turkey. In my case, though, my parents and grandparents had remained completely silent about the genocide and its effects upon them. I had been raised as an American, speaking only English and no Armenian, going to American schools and American churches, unlike many of my relatives who went to Armenian schools and Armenian churches. I knew very little about my heritage. So as a psychologist, I began to wonder what may have been passed down to me from unacknowledged pain and suffering from my grandparents and parents. Transgenerational trauma is a recent field in psychology which speaks to the ways in which trauma is passed down unconsciously from one generation to the next, both genetically and culturally. Scientists believe that trauma actually impacts our DNA, which we then pass on to our children, leaving them to literally carry some of our trauma. So I went on an inner and outer journey to find healing, not only for myself and for my dead grandmother, but also my daughter and her children. So in 2015, on the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide in 1915, I took a trip to Turkey to see the homeland of my ancestors. I wanted to see firsthand where my family had come from. I signed up to go with a bunch of other Armenians who were also looking to visit their motherland. In each town that we visited, Armin, our tour guide, would tell us how Armenians were massacred in each place and what happened. Here he said, all the Armenian inhabitants of this town were rounded up and thrown into a deep crevasse and shot. In this town, they were drowned in the Euphrates. Here, they held off the Turkish army for 10 days before being killed. At every church turned mosque along the journey, Armin pointed out hidden remnants of our Armenian heritage. A cross carved into the cornerstone of a limestone brick, a chiseled pomegranate, the Armenian symbol of fertility, hidden in a cubicle. Armenian lettering scrawled on a closet wall. With every step, it seemed as if the trip had become a search not only for the homeland of our ancestors, but for a culture lost and destroyed. Anger and sadness welled within me at how little remained of our culture in our centuries-old homeland. After returning home from this trip, which I began to call the genocide tour, I became traumatized and sunk into a deep depression. In the words of my husband, I became completely unhinged. I couldn't sleep at night, and ghoulish spirits from the Armenian genocide haunted my nights, begging for freedom from the traumas they had encountered. I was anxious and tearful during the day, and I began to wonder, am I going crazy? I better call a psychiatrist. I thought about my tendency toward depression and overeating. I wondered once again, what has gone unhealed through the silence of my ancestors and lives within me? So I went on a healing journey seeking out therapists and healers who dealt with transgenerational ancestral trauma. I read every book I could find about my Armenian heritage and started listening to Armenian music. I was trying to understand not only my ancestors, but myself. I was desperate to learn more about this part of my past which had been repressed and denied in my parents' very successful quest for assimilation. I was trying to recover a lost, cut off part of myself and my soul. I thought again of my grandmother's admonition to heal her. What did that mean? Did she want me to remember where she and her family had come from? Did she want me to live a life that she, as an Armenian woman in the early 20th century, was not allowed to live? After my book was published last year, I began to hear from many of my childhood friends about their reactions to the book. My best friend in elementary school was Lynn Hoffman. She had long blonde hair and big blue eyes and was the epitome of all-American. She called me up and she said, Jemela, I need to tell you something. My father, who I knew and loved, was actually Jewish. But he was told when he married my mother that he was not allowed to tell anyone, and he hid it. And my friend didn't find out till after her father had been dead for 20 years that he was actually Jewish. Another friend from high school called and said that after reading my book, she finally got her mother-in-law to talk about her experience during the Holocaust. We each carry legacies, some traumatic and some heroic, from our ancestors. What might you carry from your ancestors many generations past, and what will you pass on to those who come after you? The psychologist Carl Jung has stated that the greatest gift we can give our children is our healed selves. But what does healing look like? I mean, for each of us, how do we heal from that which has been passed down? So my book is my attempt to answer some of these questions about how we heal. Through varying modalities I used, including plant medicines in Peru, past life regressions, and lots of different kinds of therapy. It's all in here. Jungian psychologist James Hillman has stated that there is no real healing or love possible without forgiveness. And if we can't find forgiveness within ourselves, we need to ask for a higher power greater than ourselves to forgive for us. So if we can't forgive the Turkish masterminds of the genocide who ordered the mass extermination of the Armenians in 1915, perhaps we can ask that some power higher and greater than ourselves, whoever or whatever that be, forgive for us. As I neared the end of my book, I once again went on a healing shamanic journey with my husband, Jim. In that journey, a young, mustachioed man who looked to be in his 20s, wearing an olive green military uniform, appeared before me. I blanched when I saw him, shocked at who had appeared, for I knew who he was. I asked him, "What do you want?" This is what he said: "I am the perpetrator and you are the victim. We are one. Do not make me other. I am a part of you and you are a part of me." My heart beat fast in this meeting with the enemy, this Turkish soldier who had asked to come live within me. I know, though, that this may be what true healing looks like, to know the enemy as oneself and oneself as the enemy. We are all of the same piece. We're all one, different shadow aspects of each other. We all carry remnants of our ancestral past within us. So this is my story. Thank you.
Questions for the authors, anybody?
Question for Chick.
Yes.
It doesn't sound like you kept a journal through these several months of traveling. So how did you recall the particular stories?
I did keep a journal every day, and I still keep it to this day. But otherwise, you'd be right. It wouldn't work. Very limited sources for these stories.
I have a question,
Yes.
Jemela.
Wow.
I read the book. It was beautiful. Are you at peace now?
I am at greater peace now than I was. But I think that healing is a long journey. And I think it's ongoing. But what makes you ask?
Well,
This is my Armenian cousin, by the way.
because many of us, especially the ones that have immigrated here, I don't think we're healed yet.
Yeah. I think the culture is not healed at all.
Yeah.
I think it's
So no matter how many times we do pilgrimage, how many times we go back and forth, how many times we meet Turks and we want to come in terms with the fact, okay, they're human beings just like us. We need to work this out. It's still very, very difficult.
maybe it's something we should talk about, given that we're both psychologists.
Yeah.
And how do we heal as a culture?
Do you think everyone in the room has an understanding that Armenia was the first Christian country and why that happened?
I don't know if everyone in the room knows that Armenia is the first Christian nation. Was it 300 AD or
302. 302.
301 AD? We were the first nation to accept Christianity. Did you want to say more about that?
No. I worked for an Armenian family and I knew nothing. Okay. I came from Huntington Beach, came up to Monrovia, and worked for this family. And I learned. And I was utterly taken aback by the beauty of these families, and they'll feed you till you.
And you're all invited to my house after this.
And through that, I'm a Christian. I was told that, and since then, I just was very touched by the whole thing.
And it's a very deep ancient culture. I mean, when I was writing this book, I was in a class of people from all over the world because we were meeting on Zoom. Many of whom had never heard of Armenians, let alone know what happened to us. So there was this huge educational component. Now, I'm from, Pasadena. Everybody's heard of the Armenians here. But these people I was working with in France and Australia said, what are Armenians? Who are Armenians? And then they didn't know anything about the history. So it was educational for them. I don't know. So I don't know whether people need educating here or not.
Well, when we came here in the early 70s, that's when they would ask what, because I had an accent, where is the accent from? I'm Armenian. What is that? It's a food.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's food.
So we had a whole decade of teaching people what Armenian is.
Right.
A wonderful place to visit. Chick and I went there.
You guys have been to Armenia?
Yes.
Yeah, we had a wonderful tour.
I bet you, did you eat well?
Yep.
More than $4 a day.
When did you go?
Must have been 2017.
Oh, recently.
Wow.
Yeah, we spent 3 weeks in Armenia and Georgia.
I have a question for Chick. By the way, what's the name short for?
Charles is on my birth certificate, but not sure it's short for Charles. When I was born, I had an uncle and 2 cousins named Charles, Chuck, Chip, and Chipper. So I got the good name, which is the one that was left.
My question is actually, you said your first trip was to Africa.
Yes.
And this was in the 70s.
This was all one trip, but yes.
Okay.
One consecutive
So you went
trip.
into a culture, into a continent that has so many cultures,
right.
So many religions, so many languages. How did you cope with that?
It turns out it's a lot easier than you would suspect. All you have to do is keep yourself open and friendly and wide awake, because unsophisticated people are an astonishingly good mirror of whatever you're sending out when you go to visit them. And if you're feeling threatened and evil and mean, you're going to have a lousy time. But if you're wide open, then everybody treats you in that exactly the same way. In addition, you wouldn't suspect it, but you can always communicate with somebody even if you don't have a single word in common with them. If they're willing to put in the effort to listen hard and to try and figure out what you're saying, it does work. You can talk to anybody.
Were you alone, or?
Most of the time. I fell in with a couple of young women at one time or another who were traveling on their own and were tired of, if anybody's Muslim, I don't mean to diss you, but Muslim men in particular have a terrible time understanding why this beautiful red Ferrari is sitting there with the keys in the ignition and nobody owning it, which would be the analogy to a young woman who's not the property of some man.
Actually, that's where I was getting at, because I don't come from Armenia. I wasn't born there. I was born in the Middle East, so grew up with Muslims, and I know their reaction toward women. That's why I asked if you were alone.
Part of my life, I don't know, theory is that it's important to prevent people weaker than you from suffering harm. So that works out just fine with women saying, hey, can I share a room with you for the next year on the road? Sure. I know it's not me they want, it's cover. I can do that.
Could have been.
Might not have found Donna.
What's this?
So I have a question for Ann.
Yes.
So it's very obvious the motivation behind writing a sort of a travel log and lessons learned and stories and lessons that you can actually pass down to people. I certainly relate to your story from a personal point of view, so I can certainly understand why you would write a book like that. I want to know what compels you to write fiction? I find that topic to be one of those things that, for me, if I pick a book and I'm reading about some history, if I'm reading something that I can study some topic on, I find it easy to understand, and I find it easy to relate to. And I do read um, a lot of fiction books, and I find myself lost in them when I read them. But I want to know what's your motivation for writing fiction in particular. You made a point of saying this was a not in today's world. It was an
Right.
imaginary world, and I want to
Yes.
know what was your motivation.
I love creating stories, I guess, and characters, and I like I hear like dialogue in my head, and I see scenes in my head, and I like to bring them to life, so to speak, and learn who those characters are and have them come to become alive, I guess, in my head and on the page, and interact with other characters I've dreamed up. And I don't I read fiction and watch fiction, so, and I love the way that stories are told.
Mm.
So I play with that a lot. I wrote a story just recently when I heard the dialogue in my head, and that's how I started. I was like, well, I'm going to write this dialogue down before I forget it. And then I said, well, why don't I just write the whole thing as dialogue? So I wrote the whole thing as dialogue. So you have to convey everything about the setting and the characters and what's going on and everything in dialogue as opposed to explaining it. I just like the process of bringing something to life, I guess, that doesn't exist before, I guess is my answer.
Yeah. Kind of interesting because it's that way with composers. Things are running in their heads the whole time, and they jot it down. They jot a few notes here and a few notes there, and they get scenes and they develop them into various pieces. So I hadn't realized the similarity between the way your thought process is and some of the more successful composers.
Yeah, because like I said, I saw this opening scene in my head, and even like some of the words and the sentences, and so I said, well, I'm going to write them down, and then later I said, okay, now what is the story? Why were they in this situation, and then who are these people, and where is it going to go from here? So I just love all that. The creative process.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I actually have two questions. The first one is, how did you put this panel together? The three of you have written such different books. Do you know each other? Are you part of a writers group?
No,
how did
it's
this come together.
The bookstore.
Gail.
Yeah, totally random. We met right now.
We met this minute. Yes.
And the other question is, are you all self-published?
I am.
I'm with a small boutique press in Northern California called Empress Publications.
And what about you, Chick?
They call it direct published, which is effectively self-publishing. You can get a little help if you need
it. What's the story with the spearhead or what? The
Yes.
Yeah,
I thought he was gonna
I brought my trophy, one of my trophies.
buy my book.
That's a great segue to a teaser for the first book. The dusty train screeched to a halt, half hour after the excitement, with all the passengers busy getting sorted out and back up onto the roofs, finding and securing their belongings. During this confusing time, my Sudanese acquaintance, Mr. Adam, appeared at my elbow saying, "Men are hurt, Mr. Chika, and you must come to see them." I didn't understand what he meant, but accompanied him a few carriages forward to where the casualties were being collected. That was when I discovered that out of 1,500 people on the train, my European skin and tiny 1-inch by 1-inch by 3-inch first aid kit made me the best we could do for a doctor. All right, then, I went back to my Boy Scout and hospital orderly training, began treating the wounded as best I could. How I found myself riding on the roof of a train across the deserts of southern Sudan can be understood only if I am permitted to rewind the narrative by 2 months. If you look here, this is my seat on the train and what I could see. And here are all these guys with bunches of these little spears. So it figures right into that teaser.
All right.
Thank you for the question.
I think we maybe have time for one more question because I want people to have time to talk to you individually and also get books
Want to pass
on.
that around?
Yeah, somebody was in first.
Anita? Yeah, interesting thing that you mentioned because we immigrated here in the 1960s and there was quite a bit of prejudice and my family also told me to keep it kind of a secret that we're Armenian. And when I had kids and they grew up in La Cañada, we did a family tree, or they had to for their schools and whatnot. And so they wanted to go to grandma's house and ask, about the, her relatives. And so I kind of warned them, and it even makes me emotional now. But they didn't go ask. And, excuse me, my grandma had a difficult time telling them because she told them the story about hiding in a basement and watching her brother being tied to a horse and dragged across, and died that way. So one of the reasons I'm saying this is one of the reasons we don't know about our ancestry is that, and also because so many of them died, you couldn't ask your grandfather because he was no longer there. So it's an unfortunate thing, and I still see a prejudice that exists, especially in this area, Glendale, Pasadena area, because there are so many Armenians here. So it's understandable because of people have difficulty talking about trauma.
Yes.
And so, and especially telling your grandchildren, who are in elementary school, it's a difficult thing.
Which is really weird because I grew up every year. We were reminded, this is what happened. Remember, this is what happened. And they tell us the story from the beginning to the end. We were taught to hate the Turks and you don't talk to Turks. There is no way you're going to touch or come close to anyone. So my grandmother, I don't know great grandmother, and this is where I came to fault when I did my ancestry DNA, and it says, well, what's your great grandmother?
You don't know.
They're all disappeared.
Yeah.
But my grandmother, she made sure that Rose, she made sure for us to know what happened every year because her mother really died in a cool way. So, and when I came in and I see all the Armenian Americans hide it.
Yeah.
They say nothing,
Yeah.
which is weird because in Syria, where I'm from, I was born in Damascus. No, it's open. Everybody should hear it on a yearly basis on April 24th.
Yeah.
Think that's a cultural thing or just a personality thing? Some people don't want to talk about it or think about it, and other people do want to make sure.
There is a psychologist by the name of Ann Bernath, I think, who started this in the late 70s on why is it that American Armenians they don't deny it, they just silent about it, and why is it people that are in the Middle East talk about it all the time. And I'm thinking it's for the Middle East people, for my grandparents. It's just, I guess it's cathartic for them to talk about it because they actually went through it. Whereas her great grandmother came here and they didn't see the genocide. So I don't know if that made any difference.
One of my grandparents was part of the genocide and lost his family, but he never spoke about it either.
He never did. See, she never came to the conclusion, by the way.
There was something. I think there's something about assimilation in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lula.
I just want to say,
talking about what you said, but there's a quote by Simon Wiesenthal at the Tolerance Center, and it says, "Hope lives when people remember." So that's probably, I mean, a reason why we should. It's not something that should be erased. I know people don't want to remember the horrible things that happen in history, but you have to remember that in order to address it. And going back to what Jemela was saying about the trauma,
Right.
you can't just sweep it under the rug.
There is
and
one-
call it good.
There is one important component though. Middle East is Muslim. Where
Right,
they
I
went
know.
in is Muslim. In here it's all Christian.
Right.
So there is that.
But also the people in the Middle East knew. Like there was no hidden, you couldn't hide it. Everybody knew, and their ancestors knew why Armenians were displaced.
Yeah, because they talked about it.
Yes, because but they were in. There was a huge influx of Armenians suddenly in their country, and people were like, "Well, why are they here?" They had to understand that these Armenians didn't come. Like our grandparents didn't go from Armenia or where they.
Western Turkey. That's what we call them.
Western Armenia.
Western Armenia. Sorry.
To other places because they had no choice. So it was spoken, I think, in our history. But in America,
What happened to Gail?
Oh, I'm here. No, I was just going to say, I know that this conversation is important and could go on for a long time, but I just want to give everybody the opportunity to come up to you guys separately, and so if it's okay, well, and I know it's hot in here too, so people have been sitting very patiently for an hour. So I just want to thank everybody again so much for coming, and especially thank our three authors, Ann, Chick, and Jemela. And we're open for another hour, so stand up, move around, cool off a little bit, and they'll be happy to sign your book.